In Hollywood, every dream has a price tag, and every contract holds a hidden clause. For a gifted actor named Roy Scheider, the dream arrived in 1975 aboard a fishing boat called the Orca. The role of Chief Brody in Jaws was more than a career-making part. It was a cultural coronation. It made him an icon, the face of the first-ever summer blockbuster, a hero to millions. But this dream was built on a bargain he had made years earlier, in the quiet obscurity before the fame, a standard 3-picture deal with Universal Studios. It was a piece of paper that would become both his golden ticket and his iron chain. This is not a story about a man who fought a shark. This is a story about a man who fought a system. It's about what happens when an artist's integrity clashes with a studio's bottom line. For Roy Scheider, the global adoration that came with Jaws was the beginning of a long, frustrating war over his own career, a battle against the very forces that had made him a star. It's a tragic tale of lost opportunities, of artistic compromises forced upon him, and of a brilliant talent who spent decades trying to escape the shadow of his own biggest success. To truly understand the lightning in a bottle success of an actor like Roy Scheider, you must first understand the seismic shift that was rattling the foundations of Hollywood. The late 1960s had seen the final gasping breath of the old studio system. The rigid, moralistic Hays Code that had governed American cinema for decades had crumbled, and in its wake, a new generation of filmmakers, the new Hollywood or movie brat generation, rose up. These were directors like Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, William Friedkin, and a young Steven Spielberg, filmmakers who had grown up watching movies, not just making them. They were cinema literate, rebellious, and hungry to tell different kinds of stories. Their films were a reflection of a turbulent America. The optimism of the early 60s had curdled into the cynicism and paranoia of the Vietnam and Watergate era. The new American cinema was gritty, morally ambiguous, and deeply personal. It celebrated the anti-hero, the outcast, the flawed individual. And it required a new kind of movie star. The perfectly coiffed, impossibly handsome leading men of the past were replaced by actors who looked like real people, actors with unconventional faces and simmering, complicated inner lives. Think of Al Pacino's coiled intensity, Dustin Hoffman's nervous energy, Gene Hackman's explosive rage. These were actors, not just stars, and Roy Scheider was cut from the very same cloth. He didn't look like a movie star. He had the rugged, slightly battered face of a man who'd lived a life. That famous crooked nose wasn't a product of Hollywood styling. It was the result of his time as an amateur boxer. Born in Orange, New Jersey in 1932, to a German-American father who worked as a car mechanic and an Irish-American mother, Scheider's early life was marked by fragility. He was a sickly child, battling rheumatic fever, which left him bedridden for long stretches. To build up his frail constitution, doctors prescribed a regimen of athletics. The boy, who was once too weak to play, found his strength and his identity in sports, particularly baseball and boxing. He competed in the New Jersey Diamond Gloves tournament, a formative experience that instilled in him a lifelong sense of discipline, resilience, and the quiet confidence of a man who knew how to take a punch. This physicality was paired with a sharp, analytical mind. After graduating from his local high school, he attended both Rutgers University and Franklin and Marshall College, where he studied not only drama but also history, intending to pursue a career in law. This intellectual streak, the desire for order and reason, led him to enlist in the United States Air Force. For 3 years, he served as an officer in air operations, rising to the rank of first lieutenant. In an era where many of his future artistic contemporaries were part of the counterculture, Scheider was a disciplined officer, a man who understood chain of command and duty. This combination of the fighter's grit, the officer's discipline, and the lawyer's intellect would come to define his approach to his craft. He was not a flamboyant method-style actor who lost himself in roles. He was a technician, a professional who built his characters meticulously, brick by brick. After his honorable discharge, the siren song of the stage finally proved too strong to resist. He abandoned his legal aspirations and moved to New York City to become an actor. He paid his dues, as all serious actors of his generation did, in the trenches of live theater. He became a member of the Lincoln Center Repertory Company and a founding member of the New York Shakespeare Festival's Phoenix Theater. This wasn't a stepping stone to fame. This was the work itself. He honed his craft on the classics, and in 1968, his dedication was rewarded with a prestigious Obie Award for his distinguished performance in the play Stephen D. He was a respected award-winning stage actor, a craftsman of the highest order, long before most of America knew his name. His transition to film began with a series of minor roles, but in 1971, he appeared in two films that would become cornerstones of the new Hollywood era. The first was Alan J. Pakula's paranoid thriller Clute, where he played a chillingly suave and menacing pimp opposite Jane Fonda. But it was his second role that year that was the game changer. Director William Friedkin cast him as Detective Buddy Cloudy Russo in The French Connection. The film was a raw, visceral, and revolutionary police procedural. Friedkin shot it with documentary-style realism on the grimy streets of New York, creating a sense of chaotic authenticity that audiences had never seen before. As Cloudy, the partner to Gene Hackman's obsessive, dangerously unhinged Popeye Doyle, Scheider was the film's anchor. He was the voice of professional caution, the weary but loyal friend who had to rein in his partner's wild instincts. The chemistry between Scheider and Hackman was lightning in a bottle. They felt like real partners who had spent years together in a squad car, their dialogue overlapping, their movements in perfect, unstated sync. For this masterclass in understated acting, Roy Scheider received his first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He had officially arrived. He was no longer just a New York stage actor. He was an Oscar-nominated movie star, a respected face at the very heart of cinema's most exciting new movement. And then, a young director with only one minor hit to his name came calling about a movie based on a pulpy bestseller about a shark. The story of how Scheider landed the role of Chief Martin Brody is a classic Hollywood tale. He was at a party talking with a screenwriter when a young Steven Spielberg, fresh off his debut feature The Sugarland Express, overheard him. Spielberg was in the throes of casting his shark picture and was struggling to find his Brody. He needed someone who could project authority but also vulnerability, a man who was fundamentally decent and relatable. He didn't want a square-jawed hero. He wanted an everyman. Listening to Scheider talk, Spielberg saw it all. He saw the intelligence, the quiet intensity, and the grounded reality that the character desperately needed. He offered him the part. The production of Jaws in the summer of 1974 on the island of Martha's Vineyard is one of the most famously troubled shoots in film history. The schedule ballooned from a planned 55 days to an agonizing 159. The budget nearly tripled. The salt water corroded the electronics. And the film's main star, the 25-foot mechanical shark nicknamed Bruce, after Spielberg's lawyer, was a diva of the highest order. It sank, it malfunctioned, it looked fake. The constant delays and technical failures drove the young Spielberg to the brink of a nervous breakdown, convinced his career was over before it had even begun. Stuck on a small boat, the Orca Day After Day were the film's three leads. There was Robert Shaw, the legendary hard-drinking British thespian, playing the Ahab-like Quint. There was Richard Dreyfuss, the sharp, ambitious, and intellectual young actor, as oceanographer Matt Hooper. And there was Roy Scheider, the consummate professional, as Chief Brody. The dynamic between the three was as turbulent as the Atlantic waters. Shaw, a man of immense talent and a formidable presence, often goaded the younger Dreyfuss, testing his mettle, their off-screen friction bleeding into their characters' on-screen antagonism. Through it all, Scheider was the peacemaker, the steady hand. He was the professional who showed up on time, knew his lines, and held the chaotic production together. Much like his character, he was the stable center in a swirling vortex of oversized egos and mechanical mayhem. Spielberg's inability to use his malfunctioning shark forced him to become a more creative director. He had to suggest the shark's presence, using John Williams's iconic score, clever camera angles, and shots from the shark's point of view. This meant the human element became even more crucial. The film rested on the shoulders of Brody, Hooper, and Quint, and specifically on the audience's ability to connect with Brody's terror. Scheider's performance is a masterwork of reactive acting. He allows the audience to experience the escalating horror through his eyes. We see his quiet frustration at the town's bureaucracy, his growing dread as he studies the gruesome details of shark attacks, and the gut-wrenching panic of a father when he believes his own son is in the water with the predator. And then there's that line, "You're going to need a bigger boat." It wasn't in the script. It was an inside joke on set, something the crew would say whenever they encountered another production problem. In the moment, seeing the sheer scale of the shark for the first time, Scheider instinctively reached for it. It was a perfect, unscripted moment of human truth, and it became the most famous line in a film full of them. Jaws was released in June 1975 and became a phenomenon unlike any other. It created lines around the block. It made people terrified to go into the ocean. It invented the summer blockbuster as we know it. And it made Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Steven Spielberg household names. Scheider was no longer just a respected character actor. He was the hero of the biggest movie of all time. But as the tidal wave of success crashed over him, he was about to discover that a contract he had signed long before anyone had ever heard of Bruce the Shark was about to become an albatross around his neck. In the intricate, often predatory ecosystem of Hollywood, success is a currency, and studios are the banks. Before the phenomenon of Jaws, Scheider had signed a standard 3-picture deal with Universal Studios. For an actor, it represented stability. For the studio, it was an investment, a way to secure a promising talent at a fixed rate. But when Jaws exploded, the terms of that deal became laughably imbalanced. Scheider was now a globally recognized star, but Universal still held him for 2 more pictures at a pre-superstardom salary. It was a golden handcuff, and the studio had every intention of using it. This contractual obligation began to dictate the trajectory of his career. Scheider, ever the artist, sought out challenging roles that would stretch his abilities and prevent him from being typecast as just Chief Brody. He delivered a superb performance in the 1976 thriller Marathon Man, playing the enigmatic and deadly spy Doc Levy, brother to Dustin Hoffman's protagonist. He was suave, dangerous, and a world away from the water-fearing police chief. A year later, he reunited with director William Friedkin for Sorcerer, a bleak existential reimagining of the French classic The Wages of Fear. Scheider poured his soul into the role of a desperate exile, forced to transport unstable nitroglycerin through the South American jungle. The production was another logistical nightmare, rivaling Jaws for its difficulty, and the film itself was a dark, uncompromising piece of art. Unfortunately, it was released in the shadow of Star Wars and died a quick death at the box office. Despite the film's commercial failure, Scheider was proving his immense range. He was an actor's actor. But the clock was ticking on his Universal deal. The studio, eager to capitalize on its biggest hit, was moving forward with Jaws 2. Spielberg wanted no part of it, calling it a cheap cash-in, and Scheider felt exactly the same way. He desperately tried to find a project that would get him out of his obligation. He found it in Michael Cimino's script for The Deer Hunter, an epic, emotionally shattering story about a group of Pennsylvania steelworkers and the devastating impact of the Vietnam War. Scheider felt a profound connection to the lead character, Michael Vronsky. It was the kind of complex, transformative role he had been dreaming of. He fought for the part. But Universal, according to reports, played hardball. They allegedly used their contractual power to make it impossible for him to take the role. They didn't want him in a gritty, Oscar-bait war film. They wanted him back in Amity, fighting another shark. The role of Michael Vronsky went to Robert De Niro. The Deer Hunter went on to win 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. For Scheider, it was a devastating professional blow, the great what-if of his career. Defeated and legally cornered, he trudged back to Martha's Vineyard to film Jaws 2. His resentment was an open secret on set. He clashed fiercely with the director, Jeannot Swark, over the script's quality and the film's cynical reason for existing. "What we are trying to do is a sequel to a classic," he said at the time. "There's never been a sequel to a classic that has been any good." He gave a professional performance, as he always did, but the spark was gone. The film was a financial success, but for Scheider, it represented an artistic and personal defeat. The very franchise that had made him a star had now cost him the role of a lifetime. Having paid his dues to Universal, Roy Scheider was finally a free agent, and he used that freedom to make the most daring and brilliant decision of his career. He chose to collaborate with the tortured genius of Broadway and film, Bob Fosse, on a project that was the absolute antithesis of a summer blockbuster. The film was all that jazz, a phantasmagoric, brutally honest, semi-autobiographical musical about Fosse's own self-destructive lifestyle. Scheider was cast as Joe Gideon, a character transparently based on Fosse himself, a chain-smoking, pill-popping workaholic theater director and filmmaker, juggling the editing of his latest film with the staging of a new Broadway show, all while systematically driving himself to a fatal heart attack. It was one of the most physically and emotionally punishing roles imaginable. Scheider, who was a gifted athlete but not a trained dancer, had to submit himself to Fosse's notoriously demanding and precise choreography. He had to learn to move with the singular, angular grace of a Fosse dancer, a process that left him physically battered. But the physical toll was nothing compared to the psychological one. He had to inhabit the soul of a man actively flirting with his own mortality, a creative genius whose brilliance was inextricably linked to his demons. He was playing his own director, a man who was using the film as a form of public confession and therapy. The film's narrative unfolds as Gideon has a series of conversations with an angelic figure of death named Angelique. It's a dazzling, dark, and deeply moving exploration of art, love, regret, and the final curtain call. Scheider's performance is a masterpiece. He is sensational, charismatic, pathetic, brilliant, and broken all at once. He carries the entire film on his shoulders, dancing, singing, and emotionally unraveling in a performance of stunning vulnerability and courage. All That Jazz won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival and was nominated for 9 Academy Awards. Scheider himself received a well-deserved nomination for Best Actor. He ultimately lost to Dustin Hoffman for Kramer vs. Kramer, but his work in All That Jazz stands as the towering artistic achievement of his career. It was his definitive statement as an artist, a powerful exorcism of the blockbuster persona, and a testament to the profound talent that the studio system had tried so hard to contain. Entering the 1980s, Roy Scheider should have been at the peak of his power. He was an established star, critically acclaimed, with 2 Oscar nominations to his name, but the cinematic landscape, which he had helped to shape with Jaws, had changed again. The gritty, character-focused dramas of the 70s were being replaced by the high-concept, special effects-driven blockbusters of the 80s. The era of Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Harrison Ford had begun. Scheider, with his more grounded, human-scale presence, found himself struggling to find his place in this new world of cinematic superheroes. He made a valiant effort to launch a new franchise with 1983's Blue Thunder. He was perfectly cast as Frank Murphy, a troubled Vietnam vet and police pilot, given control of a futuristic, weaponized helicopter. The film was a slick, entertaining thriller and a solid box office hit. It seemed poised to spawn a series of sequels, but for various reasons, the momentum stalled, and a short-lived TV series was produced with a different cast. The following year, he took on the monumental challenge of succeeding William Sylvester in 2010, The Year We Make Contact, the sequel to Kubrick's 2001. It was a thankless task, but Scheider brought a much-needed warmth and humanity to the role of Dr. Haywood Floyd, grounding the film's heady science fiction. He continued to work consistently, delivering strong, reliable performances in interesting, if not always commercially successful films. He was chillingly effective as a black-mailed business owner in the Elmore Leonard adaptation 52 pickup, and gave a wry, intelligent performance in the Cold War spy drama The Russia House. He even made a memorable appearance in David Cronenberg's bizarre masterpiece Naked Lunch. He was never less than excellent. But the A-list, leading man roles in major studio pictures grew scarce. The industry that had once celebrated his everyman quality now seemed to prefer supermen. In 1993, he made a major return to the mainstream, this time on the small screen. He was cast as Captain Nathan Bridger in Sequest DSV, a futuristic underwater adventure series produced by his old friend Steven Spielberg. The show premiered to massive ratings and seemed destined for success. It had a prestigious pedigree and an intriguing premise. For Scheider, it was a chance to lead a major project again, one with a hopeful, intelligent message about oceanography and exploration. But almost immediately, the familiar conflict between art and commerce resurfaced. The network executives chasing ratings began demanding more simplistic, action-oriented plots. The science gave way to sea monsters, the thoughtful exploration to generic underwater dogfights. Scheider, a man who had dedicated his career to intelligent adult storytelling, was mortified. He saw the show's potential being squandered for cheap thrills. His disillusionment became very public. In a now infamous interview, he openly derided the show's new direction, calling it childish junk and stating, "I've become a laughing stock." It was a bold, career-risking move, but it was pure Scheider. He could not stand by and endorse something he didn't believe in. He reluctantly completed his contractual obligations for the second season, but left before the third, leaving the show to sink under the weight of its own creative compromises. The Sequest saga was a painful microcosm of his entire career, a story of immense promise undone by the relentless pressure of commercialism. In 2004, Scheider was forced to confront a battle far more terrifying than any he had faced on screen. He was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a cancer of the blood's plasma cells. For an actor who had built a life on discipline and physical control, the boy who boxed his way to strength, the man who endured the grueling physicality of films like Sorcerer and all that jazz, it was a profound betrayal by his own body. Multiple myeloma is a cruel, insidious disease. It doesn't just attack, it undermines, weakening the very bones that provide our structure and strength. It is a chronic, often aggressive, and ultimately incurable disease. The fighter's spirit that he had cultivated as a boy in the boxing ring was now called upon for the fight of his life. He faced his diagnosis with the same quiet resolve and lack of fanfare that had characterized his entire career. There was no public spectacle, no maudlin plea for sympathy. Instead, the methodical, almost academic mind that had once prepared for law school took over. He researched, he studied. He learned that one of the world's foremost treatment and research centers for this specific cancer was not in New York or Los Angeles, but in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so he went. He sought treatment at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, UAMS, Myeloma Institute for Research and Therapy, a world-class facility. In 2005, he underwent a successful bone marrow transplant that used his own stem cells, a procedure that required immense fortitude and which, for a precious time, helped to put the cancer into remission. But he didn't retreat into a private battle. In fact, he did the opposite. For a man who had often felt misunderstood or misused by the machinery of Hollywood, he found in this new, unexpected community a cause that was pure and unambiguous. He channeled his energy into advocacy. When the UAMS hospital began a campaign to fund a new cancer treatment center, Scheider became its public champion. This was not the detached celebrity endorsement of a distant star. He was on the ground, walking the same hallways and drinking the same waiting room coffee as everyone else. He lent his famous face and respected voice to the cause, speaking at fundraising events and appearing in promotional materials. He spoke candidly about his own experience, demystifying the terrifying jargon of the disease and offering hope to fellow patients. He understood that the man who faced the shark could give a voice to those facing a far more real and intimate terror. In his final years, he found a profound new purpose, using his celebrity not for personal gain, but for the tangible benefit of others who were suffering. Even as he battled his illness, he never stopped being an actor. It was, after all, who he was. He continued to work in independent films, choosing projects for their artistic merit alone, driven by a lifelong passion for the craft. His final performance was in the 2008 film Iron Cross. On paper, the role was daunting for any actor, let alone one undergoing treatment for cancer. He played the lead role of a retired NYPD detective and Holocaust survivor who, while visiting his son in Nuremberg, believes he has found the former SS commander responsible for the murder of his family. It is a dark, brooding, and psychologically complex role, a meditation on memory, trauma, and the elusive nature of justice. The sheer force of will required to complete that film is difficult to comprehend. It was a physically demanding shoot, and friends and colleagues noted his fragility. Yet on camera, the old fire was there. He poured the last of his physical energy into the performance, seeing it as a final statement. It was a perfect final role, bringing his career full circle from the New York cop of the French Connection to this haunted, broken man seeking one final measure of peace. The character's journey, a man confronting the ghosts of his past in the twilight of his life, mirrored Scheider's own confrontation with mortality. He was frail, but the fierce intelligence in his eyes, the hallmark of his entire career, burned as brightly as ever. On February 10, 2008, Roy Scheider passed away at the age of 75. There was no dramatic on-screen fade to black, but rather the quiet, dignified end to a battle fought with incredible endurance for years. His death was a result of complications from a staph infection, his immune system fatally weakened by his long and valiant struggle with myeloma. In a final cruel twist, it wasn't the cancer itself that delivered the final blow, but an opportunistic infection that took advantage of a body worn down by a relentless war of attrition. It was a testament to just how hard and for how long he had fought. He died at the very hospital he had worked so hard to support, the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences in Little Rock. It is a detail that speaks volumes about the man he was in his final chapter. This wasn't a death in a secluded Beverly Hills mansion. It was a passing in the heart of a community he had embraced, a place that had become central to his life's last great purpose. It was here, in the quiet corridors of the Myeloma Institute, that he had found a new role to play, far from the glare of Hollywood. He had become a fixture at the facility, a place where he was not just a movie star, but a fellow patient and a beloved advocate. The nurses and doctors didn't just know him as the hero from Jaws. They knew him as Roy, the man who sat in the same waiting rooms, understood the same fears, and offered a quiet word of solidarity to others on the same difficult journey. He used his fame not to demand special treatment, but to lift up the institution and the people within it, ensuring his legacy would be etched not just in celluloid, but in the very bricks and mortar of a place dedicated to healing. He faced his end not under the bright artificial lights of a Hollywood set, but in the quiet reality of a shared human struggle, surrounded by the everyday heroes he had come to champion. It was, in its own heartbreaking way, the most authentic role of his life. Roy Scheider's life was a study in quiet courage, the courage to build a sickly body into that of a fighter, the courage to pursue the uncertain life of an artist, the courage to stand up for his creative principles, even at great professional cost, and finally, the immense courage to face a terminal illness with grace, dignity, and a selfless desire to help others. He was an actor of profound skill and a man of profound character. He may be remembered as the man who needed a bigger boat, but his life proves that he was the captain of his own soul, navigating the treacherous seas of fame and fortune with an unwavering moral compass. And that is a legacy far bigger than any fish story.